Instructors, are you tired of students showing up unprepared? With Pilot Institute Online Ground School, they show up ready. No more unpaid ground lessons that run long. No more frustrated students blaming you for the slow progress. Instead, you get students who learn quickly, recommend you to friends, and also make your job easier. The result? You build flight hours faster, your students are going to succeed, and then also you get to focus on the flying. With a 99.9% pass rate and 33,000 five-star reviews, we are the ground school that instructors trust. Plus, it's completely free for CFIs. Get your free instructor account today at pilotinstitute.com/instructor.
Well, good evening. Welcome to a special MentorLIVE, our 100th broadcast. My name is Aaron Dabney. I'm the program coordinator for MentorLIVE. I'm also an active flight instructor, master instructor, and I serve on the NAFI board of directors. And what a cool milestone this is. You know, I got to start being a part of this program about halfway through our run, and definitely stand on the shoulders of giants. You're going to see some of those tonight. We've got a really good program for you, and I would say I'm your presenter too, but really I'm kind of like a DJ. I'm going to play some of the greatest hits tonight and share with you some of what we think are some of the most important takeaways. So I think you'll get a lot out of this broadcast. Before I continue, I know you saw a short video from Pilot Institute before we signed on, but we can't thank Pilot Institute enough for their partnership. Greg and his team are doing amazing things there, and would encourage you, for example, take a look at their free VOR simulator and just see some of the technology that they're putting together to help your students easily see and comprehend and understand some pretty complex concepts. They're all about breaking down barriers, and they're all about the future of flight training. So really appreciate the partnership with Pilot Institute. Obviously, we want you to earn wings credit. Even though this is sort of a greatest hits episode, we've got a quiz for you, and you can still earn wings credit. So we want you to do that. You can also join NAFI. Obviously, MentorLIVE is not something that's only open to NAFI members, but if you're not a NAFI member, we'd love to have you. Our mission is all about improving the safety of aviation by improving flight instruction, and if that's something that you're serious about, we'd love to have you as part of our organization. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the link where you can actually donate to NAFI's annual fund and help NAFI soar. Finally, even though there's not really going to be a Q&A per se tonight because the presenters are all archived video clips, we still want you to interact. So if you'll click the little chat bubble there on your video interface, you can still join our chat room. Our chair emeritus, Bob Mader, is there sort of instigating things this evening. And if you have a comment you'd like to share about any of the video clips that we're going to show or takeaways, we'd like to read those on air for you. So with that said, I'm excited to jump into the topic for tonight. Normally this is where I hand the controls off to a presenter, but I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. First off, there we go. I'm not going to read my bio slide there. I'll let you read that for yourself because this is not really about me, but I will point out that picture there, believe it or not, that little dude in that cockpit's me. I can't believe that my sister Amy and I both fit in the back seat of a J3 Cub when we were kids, what we did. It's my grandpa Joe, who's my aviation inspiration, there in the green jumpsuit, and my mom Linda. I don't think my mom knew that she was going to be on MentorLIVE tonight, but since we're looking back, I thought I would look back. So here's what I did. We have an embarrassment of riches in our archives from MentorLIVE. I don't know how many you've been able to watch, but 100 episodes is so much good material. And I went through and really had to cherry pick. I can't tell you how many hours of MentorLIVE I watched between Christmas and New Year's, but I picked what I think are my favorite 10 episodes. And out of those 10 episodes, I watched, again, more hours and pulled out what are my favorite takeaways. So I hope you enjoy it. And if I didn't pick your favorite, I'm sorry, but there's just so much good material there. We had to sort of pick and choose, right? So what we're going to do is show you where each clip came from and then let you watch these clips and let some of our favorite speakers speak for themselves. A few things that I think you should know, whether you're new or experienced as a MentorLIVE participant, believe it or not, in 100 episodes, we've had 79 different professional presenters. So there's a few repeats in there. And as you know, these are all people who are subject matter experts who have a lot to offer us in flight instruction and aviation. This is a crazy number, and we do track this stuff. We have reached 300,000 plus viewers since this thing started in 2017, 101 different countries, and this is a really important number to us because FA, Safety Program and Wings, is a big deal to us here at NAFI. We have earned, or our viewers have earned, over 25,000 Wings credits. And so at 100 episodes, we're just getting started. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first little curated clip for you here. And I thought it was appropriate that we begin with MentorLIVE number 1. This is from August 2017. And Chris Moser from AOPA and Josh Harnagel from Redboard were our presenters. And we've been looking out for instructors since day one. This presentation was about how to bring lost clients back to your flight school. And they're going to show you that the secret sauce to keeping customers around may not be so secret.
A clear progression of how someone goes from where they are now to where they want to be. And this comes from an AOPA survey. In fact, all this data comes from AOPA for the most part. But one of the number one way to have a student become dissatisfied with the training outside of maybe a customer service issue, at least in mass terms, is to feel like they don't have a clear progression, a clear step forward. And that can be that there's two parts of that. One, there's got to be a plan to begin with. There's got to be a syllabus to begin with. And two, that syllabus has got to be communicated in a way that the student can understand. I've spent a lot of time looking at Part 141 TCOs. And if you gave that to somebody who had never been in an airplane and said, this is how you're going to learn to fly, they would go cross-eyed before they get to page 4. So there's probably value in creating a document out of your TCO that says this is exactly what you're going to do in layman's terms without being overly technical about it.
All right, so really good, simple insights there. And for those of you like me who've lived for any amount in the Part 141 world, you know those remarks about those TCOs, we can really resemble those. So clarity really can be king when it comes to student success and retention. Next up, we're going to go to MentorLIVE number 20. So we'll fast forward just a bit to May of 2019. And this is the first MentorLIVE that one of your favorites of mine, Captain Brian Schiff, presented. One of his first appearances on any kind of webinar, as a matter of fact. And he asked, when could the impossible term be possible? A lot of instructors parrot the impossible phrasing without a whole lot of thought or investigation. And Brian and his dad, Barry, before him have done a lot of research, and they'll tell you there may be more nuance to that concept.
The FAA has put out an advisory circular 6183J last fall, and that advisory circular is targeted toward flight instructor refresher courses and flight instructors, of course. And in the appendix, it actually discusses the return to the field after an engine failure shortly after takeoff, and says that flight instructor refresher clinics should have instructors teach how to teach their students how to quickly determine whether or not a turn back will have a successful outcome. While that's great, now the FAA is on board with this, and it actually really vindicated a lot of the research and thinking that my father had. So for the first time in 40-something years, he feels vindicated because of this FAA for the first time saying, yeah, maybe we should take a look at this. But there needs to be some guidance, and there needs to be some direction given on that. And that's where I think we're going to kick off with what we're talking about tonight. So regarding that, first thing I'd like to discuss is the factors involved with returning to the airport. And then I'll discuss how to determine when it's an option. If it's not an option, you don't want to do it. And I'm not selling the turn back. I'm not trying to say this is what everybody should do, because most of the time you're exposing yourself to unnecessary risk. If I take off at an airport with nothing but fields in front of me, I'm not even entertaining the thought of turning back. I'm going to take one of these fields. I'd rather have the time and controllability of the airplane and go straight ahead, just like we've been taught. And most of the time, that's what we're going to get. So none of what we're going to discuss is intended to encourage anyone to turn back to the airport following an engine failure. Especially low-time pilots, they should not attempt the turn back. Statistics have shown that the probability of success with load time pilots is directly proportional to how much experience you have, and recent experience as well. It's really for the proficient pilot and someone who's practiced it and had training in it. There are no hard, fast rules on how to turn back. The factors are too numerous to mention all of them tonight. I'm going to hit the tip of the iceberg on some of the big ones, but each of the topics we talk about could be delved into deeply. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, this, and you should mention that, there is more to every one of these little considerations that we're going to bring up. And these considerations include wind direction, wind speed, what kind of turn to make, how far from the airport can I be to do this? Am I too close or too far? The important one is how much altitude do I need to make this turn? And there have been instructors teaching it, some of them doing a really good job. Others, maybe their intent is to do a good job, but they're giving some misinformation. And in the wind, for example, if you have a really strong headwind, should you attempt to turn back? This is just an example of one of the many considerations. I say no if you have a strong headwind. For example, you want to take advantage of that. If you're going to crash land straight ahead, then if I have a stall speed of 50 knots, for example, and a 20 knot headwind, well, then I'm going to crash land at about 30 knots. Or do I want to turn around and have a 20 knot tailwind? My stall speed of 50 plus that 20 is 70 knots. Think of yourself as being in a car. If you're going to crash a car, would you rather crash at 70 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour? The energy, because of that difference in speed, is dramatic. The survivability skyrockets if you can touch down slowly. And in addition to that, with a really strong headwind, you turn around, now you're making this downwind turn, and you're going to have a pretty good tailwind. You might overshoot the airport, not make it back anyway, because you'll pass it. So because of the danger in returning to the airport, a turn back should only be performed when it would be more hazardous not to. And you may hear me say that a few times tonight, that the turn back to the airport should only be made when it's more hazardous not to. And we'll talk about some of those things. Flight instructors, you're going to teach students how to do this maneuver or how to practice it in their airplane. You should become thoroughly familiar with the specific airplane you're going to fly, its handling characteristics, and all the things that are involved in this aspect of turning back before you give instruction in that airplane on turnbacks.
I may or may not be, I am one of those instructors who was taught and parroted the immutability of that impossible moniker. So I remember when I saw Barry and Brian's concept first started being written about, I was one of the ones who was like, do what? But that was a really eye-opening broadcast, and so I really encourage you to watch the rest of it. Obviously, learning the factors and learning how to determine when things are possible versus impossible and practice are going to be key. And in addition to that program, Brian's got a lot more information on that topic on captainshift.com, his website. So highly recommend you check that one out. And I've seen a couple of comments here. I hope we all looked as young in 2019 as Brian did there. Okay, moving on along to our next greatest hit. We have Mike Adams from one of our long-term partners at Avimco talking about insurance claims, what they can teach us. This was an interesting one too, because there's some mighty useful numbers that we can't necessarily glean from the NTSB data. Elsewhere in the broadcast, I don't think I captured this clip. Mike actually makes the remark that the insurance company is always going to find out about things that the FAA and NTSB might not, because we tend to want those claims covered. So let's hear what Mike has to say.
So I've got one more number here that I like to show you because insurance people like numbers, and that's coming up. One of the things that we did on landing losses is we looked at our landing accidents and tried to determine how long it had been from when the person last flew with an instructor and when they had a landing accident or a landing claim. And it either came from when there was some dual signed off in their logbook or their last flight review on it. And the average time of all of our landing claims, this is over a 10-year study of landing claims, was 373 days. And that is one reason why Avemco promotes annual flight training for their customers. We give a premium credit for it. We support the Wings program. If you're doing the Wings pins, we're the company that buys them and sends them out to you on behalf of the FAA. And you can now use this number, 373, with your clients to help convince them that they need to fly with you on an annual basis, because it's going to decrease the potential of them having a loss.
373 days. I think we've all seen the difference between those longtime customers who come and see us as often as they should, and those who maybe we only see every 24 months to get their ticket punched. You know, if an apple a day keeps the doctor away, maybe we flight instructors need a phrase like that too. Moving on along, we're going to talk about risk for a few minutes. First up is another one of our board members and former NTSB investigator, Greg Feith. This was MentorLIVE number 44 for May of 2021. This is a talk that Greg is known for: is your defensive flying offensive? And the takeaway from this clip is Greg's going to remind us that risk management really is a cycle and not just a one and done sort of event.
When you look at the cycle of errors, we have to mitigate or eliminate the hazards that are involved in aviation, in our own personal flying, so that we don't have an ugly flight. So let me give you the cycle. Of course, you always have the problem or the issue or the proactive mindset of let's identify the risks. That's why FRATs and FRAMPs are there. Those are those flight risk assessment tools that we should all be using in some form or fashion, because it helps us at least quantify and qualify what are some of the risks that I'm going to run into during the course of my flight. So of course, we're going to identify those risks. The next part of it is we have to evaluate that risk. Is this something that I have to be concerned with now? Is it something that I have to be concerned with later on? Is it something that in flight, this needs immediate action, or do I have time to take some time to understand and assimilate before I take some sort of corrective action? Of course, then the next part of it is determine the appropriate corrective action to either mitigate or eliminate the risk. There are going to be times where you can't eliminate the risk, but you can minimize it or mitigate it so that you can successfully get the aircraft on the ground in an emergency situation. So you're going to take that corrective action. And then, of course, you're going to evaluate to see if that corrective action was appropriate. Here's the problem. This is where a lot of people stop. They figure, okay, I took the corrective action. It seems to be working. I'm good to go. Well, guess what? That corrective action has only taken this particular event, the immediacy of this event, and mitigated it or eliminated it. But that corrective action could have created some sort of hazard that is unforeseen. So the last step here is to identify the potential for a new risk based on your corrective actions.
Was anybody else as distracted as I was with that picture and thinking about how painful that could be? Move the torch, man. But when an NTSB investigator talks about risk, I'm inclined to listen. You know, one of my favorite grad school professors always said, for every entry, there's an exit. And so that makes what Greg was saying really ring true to me, that we always need to think about which other dominoes might fall downstream of that one domino that we flick trying to solve a problem. So really good takeaway there, and we appreciate that, Greg. Next up, we'll move on to our fifth takeaway. We're going to continue on the topic of risk management with some of the GOATs in our industry, John and Martha King. This was not an easy topic, but we were pleased to have their take on it, on the Learjet tragedy that happened at Gillespie Field there in San Diego a few years ago. And they remind us with their presentation, in part dissecting this tragic accident, that managing risk needs to start well before we open those hangar doors. And who better to carry that message than the inventors of PAVE?
I think you can see that what we're basically talking about here is a lot of thinking ahead of time before you've even gotten in the airplane and started the engine to find out, to talk through with yourself, if you're single pilot, or with your other crew member, what exactly are we going to do? Here's why this is a challenging situation. Here's what our options are. Here's what our basic minimums are going to be. And if it doesn't work out, here's what we're going to do next.
Now, there's a lot of talk about loss of control and controlled flight into terrain being the cause of accidents. And our argument is they're not the cause of accidents, they're the result of the crew getting into a situation that either the airplane or the crew can't handle. So our suggestion is don't get yourself into a situation that the airplane or crew aren't prepared for. You got to be able to handle them. So as I was a kid going into school, the nuns used to tell me, don't get yourself in the occasion of sin. And in this case, if you have lost the control and controlled flight into terrain, maybe it's an example of having gotten yourself into an occasion of sin. You've gotten yourself in a situation that you can't handle.
So the lesson to take away from that really is that we need to look upstream for opportunities for proactive risk management to avoid getting into that situation.
I think, not to make light of the scenario, but I think John put it best when he quoted one of the sisters from his school days: avoid putting yourself in a position to sin in the first place. We're going to sort of continue on this theme and move on to August 2022 by the late Richard McSpadden. Obviously, Spad was one of the just the most passionate, accomplished voices for aviation safety that any of us at NAFI and probably many of you have ever met. And so definitely could not put this series of clips together without featuring Spad. Most of us will never forget where we were when we learned that he had been killed in an aviation accident. And of course, that final report's out now. But before I show you Spad's remarks, and I know this has been said by a lot of people, Brian has said this too, but this is not one of his takeaways. But I think when something like this happens to a pilot like Spad or like Rob Holland, that really should give us pause as aviators to say, if this can happen to one of these kinds of people, then who do I think I am? And that shouldn't be defeatist or anything like that, but it just should remind us of how hazardous what we do and what we teach really is, and how seriously we need to take these things like risk management and the decision-making process, which is what Spad's going to talk about. He's going to open up the cowling here for a couple of minutes for you on how our decision-making as humans works.
A couple other things about the human decision-making process that impact how we make decisions when we fly. The first is whenever we see a new situation or we're presented with a situation, the first thing the brain does is it tries to tag it to something that it's seen before. This is why you've heard and you probably experienced that the more you learn, the faster you can learn more. So it's like the smarter you are, the smarter you get. It's because your brain has a much wider library to take new concepts and apply it and work with it and see how to sort it through. The next thing it does is it will tag it with an emotion. So it says, we've seen this experience before. We've flown this approach before. We've flown near this kind of thunderstorm before. We've made a 0-0 takeoff before, and the outcome was good. So, we should be just fine. And you can see where I'm headed here. This is the problem that we get into in aviation, because the brain will want some pattern recognition. It will reach really hard to tie it to some experience we've had previously, and then it will tie it to that emotion. The problem in aviation is, when has any flight situation ever been exactly the same? I can tell you, Karen mentioned, and many of you know, part of my background is I led the Thunderbirds for a couple years. We flew that demonstration. There were 6 different demonstrations we would fly, and I flew each one of the 6 variants. I would guess hundreds of times in practice and in real shows. and they were never the same. And the reason they weren't is because, this is what we love about aviation. Something is always different. The sun angle's different, the show line's different, the winds are different. I'm in a different airplane, my wingmen are in a different airplane, our health is different on that day. So many variables that it was never different. And a lot of the way that we found safety in that relatively risky regime was we would brief every flight and identify what was going to be different about today's flight, whatever that variable might be. And so I encourage really young pilots, and I encourage student pilots especially, that when you're with an instructor or when you're with somebody, I talk about this a lot in the backcountry, and they say, "Oh, don't worry about it. I've been into that strip, hundreds of times before, dozens of times before. We'll be just fine." Don't accept that as face value. Help them, ask them to explain it to you how today's flight is a little bit different than the last time they flew in. What you're going to do is help them do a little bit deeper processing, and you're also going to help yourself probably feel more comfortable, because chances are they're a really experienced pilot and they're going to help explain to you why it is. But by doing that, you're making sure that check is being done, and you're also getting a little bit of insight into how experienced pilots process things. So that emotional tagging, it's pretty interesting that is also associated with fight or flight. So there's some pretty funny stories about Air Force pilots ejecting out of airplanes, and when they hit the ground, they just got up and started running. Their plane was miles away, and they were fine, and they just started running, and suddenly they would realize, wait, what am I running for? I mean, I'm fine, I'm safe. And it was a kind of a delayed reaction of the brain going, hey, pattern recognition, we studied about this, and ejecting out of an airplane is bad and the outcome is not good, so run away from it. So this whole fight or flight mechanism comes from this process that the brain works and how we make decisions.
When we were first starting to talk about doing that one, I remember running into SPAD for the first time in the middle of Boeing Plaza at AirVenture. And this guy didn't know me from Adam, but I think we stood there for about 15 minutes talking, and that's just how he always was, generous with his time. If you cared about aviation, he had time for you, and I hope you got to meet him as well. We lost a really good friend of aviation and a really good friend of NAFI. So thank you, SPAD. We miss you, and we know that your example and your passion for aviation safety is going to be felt for generations of pilots. We're going to see now, or hear now, from another dedicated servant to aviation, and talk about a renaissance man. Dr. Victor Vogel was on our board at NAFI for years, one of my mentors on the board. Because becoming an accomplished medical oncologist wasn't enough of an achievement for him, he also became an accomplished aviation educator and an accomplished advocate for all things wellness in aviators. And when the mental health issue really started coming to a head in 2023, he was the first one on our board to step up and say, we as an organization need to talk about this and do more about it. And so this really, we considered Victor's MentorLIVE kind of a pivotal, groundbreaking episode. We had never broached that subject before, and the way he did it was absolutely perfect, to the extent that we actually ran that broadcast twice. He's going to show us here really simply how we as instructors can be part of the mental health solution for our learners.
The signs and symptoms of mental illness, remember, that was mild cognitive impairment. But we all have days when we're feeling sad or down. But if it's a repeated problem and somebody has that hangdog look every day or every time we see them, that might be an indication that some sort of intervention is necessary. Confused thinking or reduced ability to concentrate, if they just can't focus on the task, or having fears or worries that are extreme, or they have guilt that's out of proportion to something that happened, if they feel they're causing things that weren't their fault. Or they have these recurrent fears or worries. Now, we all have certain anxieties about certain kinds of flights. I mean, flying in the winter in Pennsylvania in the ice is something that raises some fears or concerns, but that's appropriate. But if those fears or worries don't seem to have a necessary cause, that's a sign that something maybe need to be done or further investigated. mood changes, people that have swings in high and lows. One time they're high as a kite, next time they're low and depressed. That can be a sign that something's wrong. Repeated tiredness. Now, you know, the older I get, the less energy I have. I could work for 30 hours as an intern and get through that 30 hours. If I work 8 or 10 hours now, I'm exhausted. But if it's tiredness that's beyond the situation, if there's tiredness without energy expenditure, or people that seem to be detached from reality, especially if you see delusions. I mean, if people have wild, crazy ideas, or they, and especially if they have hallucinations, that's a sign of serious mental illness, or they can't cope with simple problems like excessive frustration with things like traffic jams or the weather, or trouble understanding or relating to other situations. You know, if someone hears about someone else's misfortune and they just don't seem to have any empathy or sympathy about it, that's a concern. Or certainly alcohol and drug abuse, changes in eating habits, you know, people who stop eating, or sex drive changes. And that can be hard to get to because we're not often talking about our sexual problems, but somebody may bring it up. Or if they have anger or hostility or violence that seems to be out of proportion to the precipitating events, and especially if they have suicidal thinking. If someone says, you know, I really think I want to kill myself, that is a red flag waving, and we ought to be attuned to that. Sleep or appetite changes, mood change, these rapid changes. Now, again, we all have down days. We all have very happy days. You know, I remember the day my daughter got accepted into medical school, or my son was elected captain of his lacrosse team in college. Those were very happy and elated days. But then there's down days when I lost a patient as a physician. Those would be sad days. But those kinds of things are part of normal life. But if these changes in ups and downs are dramatic, that's a sign of potential mental illness. And these are recommendations from the American Psychiatric Association. If somebody seems withdrawn, if you have a learner who sits in a corner and doesn't engage with other people, doesn't talk to airport personnel, doesn't talk to other students or learners, doesn't interact with other flight instructors, that may be a sign. Or a drop in functioning. You know, they've been doing well, and now all of a sudden they miss lessons, or they come unprepared, or they can't pay attention during a lesson, or they seem to be not hearing what we're saying. That's a red flag. Problems with solving, as I said, you know, if we do scenario-based training and they can't concentrate, or they don't seem to be able to process events or data that we tell them, or they're highly sensitive. You know, anyone who breaks into tears, or who wells up and can't speak, and has that much emotion, that may be a sign of a problem. Or if they're apathetic, if they just don't seem to care anymore about what's happening, or they're late for a lesson, or they didn't do the assigned homework, or, you know, they just don't seem to have any concern, or feeling this disconnected, that they're not interacting with others, either their instructors or other learners that may be part of the school. Illogical thinking, nervousness, you know, and nervous habits like pencil tapping, or fidgeting, or unusual behavior that's odd or uncharacteristic, or changes in the word. You know, you see somebody you've known them for weeks or months, and all of a sudden their attentiveness to their training changes. They're absent more, their performance declines, they have difficulty interacting with others. These are signs and symptoms that should tell us that it's time for some intervention. Not intervention from us, but we flight instructors should refer these affected individuals to places where they can receive proper help.
Really good stuff from Dr. Vogel there. So, you know, even though as instructors, we can't necessarily fix these problems for our learners like we could a bad landing, hopefully getting us educated about these issues and how to direct our learners to the right help will empower us to be part of the solution. And in that stigma we've had in aviation surrounding mental health, and actually get people the help that they need. I want to recognize Dr. Vogel here as well. You know, not only is he an accomplished physician and an accomplished aviation educator, he also helped to found a very active STEM organization in the Susquehanna Valley of Pennsylvania where he lives. And so this guy has just done so much for aviation, and actually retired from service with our board of directors in December of last year after doing so much for our organization, things that members see in public and so many things behind the scenes. So thank you so much, Victor, for being such a voice for aviation education, such a voice for pilot mental health, such a voice for STEM education, and such a great example of a professional to all of us. We really appreciate your service. Before I move on here, I want to take a break and just recognize how much work our presenters put into being a part of MentorLIVE. If you ever looked at one of these presentations and said to yourself, that sounds like a lot of work, it really is. They really are researching and writing and rehearsing a 45-minute to 1 hour mini lecture. For every presenter, we'll start working on their broadcast day up to 3 months ahead of time, working back and forth on honing their topic in, working on their slide deck. There's about 8 different deliverables that they have to get to us, not only so that we can make them look good on MentorLIVE and bring you a good product, but also so that we can make sure and give you wings credit. They spend hours on this is not Zoom, but a very similar format to Zoom, doing technical checks, rehearsing their broadcasts, and then of course broadcasting live what you see. What you don't see is, and we did the same thing tonight, even though it's just me, because, you know, routine and procedure. They actually show up an hour before you see them on camera here to make sure that everything is as perfect as we can get it. And then they'll hang out for an hour, or for half an hour to 45 minutes for a debrief after the fact. So these people are not getting paid a cent for this. They do this because they want to serve aviation. They want to serve you. They want to bring you great information. And know that every presenter you see on MentorLIVE does a lot of work on your behalf. And so, you know, for the 10 presenters that we'll show tonight, and for all of the other 69 presenters that you won't see tonight, we can't thank you enough. We couldn't do this without them, obviously. Next up, we're going to go to, and Bob just says, oh shucks, we're going to go to our chair emeritus, Bob Mayer from MentorLIVE number 80 in May of 24. There we go. That'll fix that problem. This is another, to me, another vital MentorLIVE for anybody who's looking to put together a playlist, the most important ones. I'll let Bob do the talking here. And he actually first gave this presentation at our very first NAFI summit in Lakeland, Florida in 23. But as soon as I saw it, I said, we've got to put this in front of a wider audience on MentorLIVE. And Bob's going to go beyond some commonly cited statistics to really talk about our primary responsibility as aviation educators.
Now, one of the problems we have in aviation is we toss statistics around like crazy. Now, I say a problem because we have to measure this stuff. This is the safest, the accident rate, the fatal accident rate and the overall accident rate have been trending down according to the NTSB for the last 10 years. We're down to 0.2 fatal accidents per 100,000 hours. Well, that's great.
Right.
So that means I can't do the math in my head. I got to carry the decimal the right way. What, every 5 million hours we're willing to sacrifice somebody? Is that what we're saying? That if, while we're doing great, we're only killing people once in a while? Again, I'm not trying to put down general aviation or say we're doing stupid things. I am saying what's important here. And what I love, Victor Vogel, one of our board members, gave me this quote from Paul Broder. Statistics are human beings with the tears wiped away.
Yeah.
Okay, it's that simple. Somebody died in the fatal statistic numbers. Somebody died to get that number, to make it to that hit parade. That's not good.
Right.
And we need to do everything in our power to prevent that. And we do it all the way from every time we touch a student, whether no matter what their rating is, whether they're a beginner or it's some guy, a retired airline captain with an ATP coming to us for a flight review. we touch them, and we have an opportunity to help them be better, to avoid that being part of this.
Yep. Yeah, and most of us would probably remember very significantly our first flight instructor.
Yes.
I know. I mean, I can picture his face now. He had gigantic hands. He was about 6'5" and flew in Vietnam. I was awestruck, and I just still remember, just like you did, and I'm sure our listeners do too. You have a chance to make a really big impression.
And then the people who come after that, the instructors who've come after that. Let me give you this one. Another way to look at it, Matt Zaccaro, the late Matt Zaccaro, who was president of HAI, now VA, Vertical Aviation International. Every number he said this in a speech in 2015, I believe, in Las Vegas. Every number is a mother, every number is a mother, brother, father, sister, friend. And I'm paraphrasing it, and I got the order wrong here off my own slide. I can't find the direct quote, but what he said resonated. Every one of these numbers is somebody.
Yep.
Somebody cares about that individual. On the positive side, the influence that we have is, some of you may remember an article I wrote about a young Marine pilot who started with me and wound up flying the Osprey at Oshkosh demonstrator. I taught his dad, who elected not to go on into aviation, a physician in Omaha. And then he got his instrument rating with me, and then went on to the Marine Corps and wound up surprising me by being the Osprey demonstrator pilot. Well, I found out his niece, the young man's niece, the third generation here, because of the influence from her uncle and by inference me, wants to go on and become a pilot.
That's awesome.
She's 16 years old. I believe she's 18. She'll be at Oshkosh at the camp. No, 16, I believe. She'll be at the camp at Oshkosh. And Steve called me up, the grandfather and all this. Oh yeah, we'll be at Oshkosh. We want to see you, and we want to talk to you, and this and that, the other thing. I'm tickled pink. So our influence is profound. For good or for evil, our influence is profound in this business. And instructors have to understand and internalize that.
Yep. Yeah. It's that noble responsibility.
I like that.
Such a good reminder of the weight of responsibility that we have as instructors, and the impact that we have on students, really for generations, if you think about it. And I know you all do too. I view that as something that humbles me and awes me, both in good ways. And Bob, I'm proud to tell you, I actually use this MentorLIVE episode in its entirety in my Fundamentals of Instructing class at Baylor University. So, even students who may not have seen on MentorLIVE are being exposed to it. So thank you so much to Bob Bader for putting this together and making this sort of his signature talk. Next up, we are going to move on to more of a technical subject and show you some remarks from both Mark King and our board chair, Karen Kalashek. And they're going to bring us a call as an industry to take a good look at what we find acceptable and what is acceptable and what isn't when it comes to CFI spin training. This is an interesting one.
I don't think a lot of people are really reading the FAR that governs or requires the spin endorsement, and demonstrating instructional proficiency in stall awareness, spin entries, spins, and spin recovery procedures. Okay, what does that really mean? And all too often I'm hearing about, well, I got a spin endorsement in the 172. It was one turn to the left, one turn to the right. And I don't necessarily think that that's instructional proficiency. Karen, what do you think about that?
Well, I would certainly agree. So let's talk just a bit about what is instructional proficiency and what that endorsement says. So that spin endorsement indicates that the pilot receiving it is competent and demonstrates, again, professional instructional proficiency. So what that means is that person has the knowledge that obviously you'd anticipate they should, so that they're competent in the level of knowledge. They have the skills in order to fly the maneuver, demonstrate it. Very important when you come into instruction. They have to be an effective instructor. It's not just having rote memorization, but it's being able to safely demonstrate and teach someone else. So as far as instructional, they have to adapt to the person's learning style. They have to overcome if someone they're teaching has a freezing tendency, they have to decide they're going to overcome that. They have to be effective. And very importantly, as an instructor, they have to have the ability to provide an assessment of the individual. Because remember, when that instructor is teaching, they're looking to make sure that person meets those minimum, and I emphasize the word minimum, FAA standards to themselves past whatever level of examination they're taking. So they have to be able to assess, is that person themselves have a level of proficiency, competency, and if that person, the person receiving the spin endorsement, has to also be able to determine if there are deficiencies or a need for enhancing that training. They have to figure out how to go back and do that effectively. So it's a pretty high standard. It's not that someone survived their own CFI spin training and that made them instructionally competent. It's definitely a high standard for the CFI spin endorsement.
Yes, it is. And I think a lack of reviewing the advisory circular and not reading 6183, where there's a little bit more to it than just spins. So our syllabus that we use, we start off with some basic coordination exercises. We look at turns. We identify the elevator as a primary turn control. We use that to talk about G loading changes in stall speed due to G. We do a deep dive into slow flight, power on, power off stalls. We do a falling leaf, a rudder turn exercise, and then we do a series of 1 and 2 turn spins. It's not just one and done. All of this to create instructional proficiency, where the student is able to instruct us or me, and the instructors that we have at our school, CP Aviation, where they can give it back and at least demonstrate the beginnings of proficiency. We don't expect that a beginning flight instructor is going to be an expert, but they certainly need to know the material. I see a lot of cases where they're stuck on rote. I'll ask the question, what causes the airplane to spin? And they'll tell me, well, it's one wing stalled more than the other. What they can't tell me is, how does that happen? Or it's an uncoordinated stall. They can't tell me what that means.
Right.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, you add an important component that, not a lot of spin endorsement trainers do. I shouldn't say not a lot, that's a presumption. Not everyone does, is that you make certain that they have that proficiency where they're turning around and teaching you. Not that they're receiving it, but they're also providing it. And that's an important part of that endorsement.
That's another one that's definitely worth watching in its entirety. I was thinking about this. We're probably, with the audience we typically have here on MentorLIVE, we're probably preaching to the choir, if not a bunch of choir directors here. But if you're involved in preparing instructor applicants, definitely worth some food for thought to consider the idea that an applicant being coached through a couple of spins in a Skyhawk may not instructional proficiency guarantee. And if that's what your spin training looked like, we might say that you owe it to yourself and your learners to go out and get a little bit more in-depth spin training. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. I'm going to show you another, I think, great clip to end on, but don't go anywhere. I've got a few more things I want to share with you when you finish with this. I went a little bit out of order here and went back to number 88 because I kind of want to end at a look to the future. So Greg, our friend at Pilot Institute, is going to give us a look into the future of flight training technology. And the cool part is some of it's already here.
All right. The next thing I want to talk about is how we can use this for airspace visualization. So I'm going to show you a video. We'll get back to the slides in a second. But the idea here is, how many of you have issues with your students, show me your hand, where students look at a sectional chart and they have no idea what this looks like in 3D because they have to build this thing in their head, especially when there's complex airspace that overlaps and all of that. So we've designed a module that essentially takes you straight onto the top of a sectional. You're a giant and you can walk all over the sectional and you can point at things and click on them. And then the airspace builds up in 3D. And you have the ability to get higher, lower, depending on how you want to look at it. If you want more of a godlike view, or if you want more like a I'm on the ground kind of view. You can see here, this is Class E airspace. It explains where the base is, where the top is. You can see a Class D airspace. Here's a Class B airspace in Miami. So Class Bravo, it builds up all of the different layers of the upside down wedding cake. And now your students can really picture the further you are from the airport, the higher the airspace is. Here I'm building more volumes, Class E at the surface. Here's a Class Charlie north of, I think it's Fort Lauderdale, north of Miami. And you can see all of these modules building up, and you click on them again and they just disappear. You can see Class Alpha right at the top. You can turn that on and off. We've built the restricted areas, right? Sometimes the restricted areas are layered where you have an Alpha, a Bravo, a Charlie on top of it. This will show you everything. Now, we've designed it for the Miami sectional at the moment. This is more of a proof of concept that we're using. We're building a much larger model where you'll be able to have more sectional charts. But what we've seen from students, the feedback on this is the ability to improve your situational awareness when you're flying. You've seen it on the sectional chart. Now you're in the airplane, and it's almost like you can visualize these volumes in front of you as you're flying, because now they make a lot more sense. This is great for telling a student that's going to be flying in that area. You put the goggles on and you say, hey, let's get familiar with this area because we're going to be flying here a lot. You can visualize the airspace. You can see where maybe the waypoints are, or the reporting points for the airport. We're also building this so that you can have an obstacle and build the obstacle in 3D so you can see it in the airspace pop. I can think of near Orlando, there's a lot of very tall towers, like 2,000-foot towers. So we can build those in the 3D airspace, and then you can see exactly what's going on. So great for saving time and money, obviously, on the ground, something that you don't have to teach in the airplane, which is difficult to teach in the cockpit. And then, like I said, we can include terrain. Now, we picked Florida because Florida is flat. I live in Arizona. We have mountains all around. We have 12,000 foot terrain nearby. So this would be great also to kind of visualize the airspace along with the terrain at the same time. And of course, in the future, I want to have several things in here. I want to have some sort of traffic, possibly even live traffic from an ADS-B feed. And then you have the ability to see this popping up in here. TFRs possibly that are popping up, right? You go before you fly, you can put these on, you can see all the TFRs that are in place and visualize them. And then cross-country planning. Imagine being able to say, hey, I'm going to fly from Melbourne, I used to fly there, all the way to Key West. And then now you can visualize your flight path going through all the airspace. Great for students to get that visualization. And then if we can even add the live weather on top of it, but in addition to getting you briefing from a briefer or getting it from ForeFlight, now you can visualize this live weather, how it's going to be during your flight. What an amazing tool. Again, I'm dreaming. This is future, but we have the technology to make it happen. So it's not that far of a stretch, quite frankly.
That's just cool. I'll tell you, for a 45-year-old guy, I learned to fly pretty old school. In that the backseat of that Cub that I showed you, no intercom, no radio, no headset, just a pair of the orange foam earplugs from the Tractor Supply. But seeing stuff like that, seeing the technology that's being developed really rapidly to help us transmit information more effectively, and honestly to help us meet expectations of modern learners in terms of how they expect their training to be delivered really is exciting. And it's going to be really interesting in 100 more episodes to see what kinds of technology like that presenters like Greg are talking about. So that brings us to the end of our little taste of the first of lots and lots of episodes to come of MentorLIVE. And before we sign off, stick with me. I think there are some acknowledgments that a lot of people are owed. And the first group that we owe is you, our participants, our viewers. Whether this is your first MentorLIVE or your 100th, thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. Thank you for telling people about what we do. We do this because of you and because of your students. And so first and foremost, we're grateful to be a part of your professional development. We're grateful that you trust us. We also owe every single presenter, like I said, 79 of them, every single host, every single sponsor, and there's been a lot of them, every single NAFI staff member or volunteer who's worked in front of the camera or behind the scenes to make this thing work, a huge debt of gratitude. I started counting, and that number is pushing 200 if I add all those people together. So a lot of hands have made this thing look really good. I'd also be remiss if I didn't recognize again our Chair Emeritus, Bob Mader, whose Chairman's webinars really kicked this thing off. And so again, me and whoever comes after me that gets to do this really awesome gig, coordinate MentorLIVE, we're standing on some pretty big shoulders. So thank you, Bob. And finally, we need to thank and recognize John Typen with Aeronautical Proficiency Training. You never see John because he's working the levers. John is our producer, our tech producer behind the scenes. He's what makes this thing look so good, despite sometimes the host's best efforts. He's what makes this thing look so professional. If you've gotten to work with John, you know that everything he touches looks better when he's done with it. So thank you so much, John. A few things I want to ask you to do. Number one, if you don't, excuse me, already have an FAA-safety.gov account, I know we talk about this every month, but go set yourself up an account, FAA-safety.gov, set one up tonight and take your first wings quiz if you've never done that. The FAA wings program has so much good stuff out there. We highly encourage you to integrate that into what you're doing with your flight reviews. There's so many uses for wings, and we can't say enough good stuff about that. So if you've been on the sidelines, tonight's the night. Go set that account up, take your quiz, get your wing certificate, and make sure your friends do it next time. I also want to ask you to do yourself and your fellow pilots and your students a favor and share the link for tonight's program with someone who's never watched MentorLIVE before. And this is a really good sampling of what we do here. And we want to continue to grow this audience, not for our benefit, not necessarily for our sponsors' benefit, but for the benefit of aviation, because we're just getting started. Trust me, some of the content we're going to bring you as this year evolves. It's going to blow your mind what kind of subject matter experts we're going to be able to put in front of you this year. And finally, if you're not a NAFI member, I know we say this every time, but we are really in the middle of one of the most exciting phases, I think, in the history of our organization. And I know how the sausage is made. I'm on the board, and trust me, good things are coming. Our new executive director, Brian, has got some great ideas, and so NAFI is going to be a really cool organization, and you're going to want to be a part of it. If you're not a member already, join us. It'll be the best money you've spent for your instructional career. Finally, I want to give you your very first teaser for this year's in-person event. We have partnered for the first time ever with Stratus Financial, and NAFI Summit is now going to be called the Ascend Flight Training Summit, and it is going to be awesome. It's September 8th through 10th of this year in Dallas, Texas. If you Google Ascend Flight Training Summit, you'll find the website. It looks slick. Going to be really good presenters, and so we'll be reminding you about that every month between now and September, but trust me, you want to be there. If you were at any of the first 3 NAFI summits, you know how good they were. We're about to turn that up to 11, so we want to make sure and see you there. Can't believe we just wrapped up MentorLIVE number 11, but here we are, so thank you again. Number 11. Anybody can do this job, y'all. MentorLIVE number 100. 100 episodes and 1,000 lessons. Thank you again so much for being here. Next month, I promise you good stuff. Take a look at this title, Beyond Procedures, Training Mental Performance in Aviation, Why Confidence, Focus, and Performing Under Pressure Deserve Deliberate Training. Tammy, if you know anything about her, is incredible. You are gonna carry some good takeaways away from her presentation, so make sure next month, February 18th, you're here, and you'll be glad you did. Make sure your friends are here as well. Again, thank you so much to Pilot Institute for the generous sponsorship. Such good products, such good technology, so many good things to come, and we're grateful for their partnership with us and as an organization. I know I've already said it, earn your wings credit, join NAFI, enough said there. And with that, look at that. I've only kept y'all 2 minutes over. So again, thank you for watching Mentor Live number 100. We'll see you next month for number 101. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.
Instructors, are you tired of students showing up unprepared? With Pilot Institute Online Ground School, they show up ready. No more unpaid ground lessons that run long. No more frustrated students blaming you for the slow progress. Instead, you get students who learn quickly, recommend you to friends, and also make your job easier. The result? You build flight hours faster, your students are going to succeed, and then also you get to focus on the flying. With a 99.9% pass rate and 33,000 five-star reviews, we are the ground school that instructors trust. Plus, it's completely free for CFIs. Get your free instructor account today at pilotinstitute.com/instructor.